Amid a crazy few weeks of news, one story that's been bumped down in priority is the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, but quietly his Senate confirmation hearings are scheduled to begin Tuesday. As debate develops in the Senate and certainly across news outlets and on your social media timeline, there's one particular lie about this nominee that I've been wanting to discuss in detail for several weeks now, but amid all the other things going on, I, like many others, have been putting my attention elsewhere. The first and the obvious thing to observe about these hearings is the Democrats would oppose any nominee on absolute terms. Doesn't matter who it is. It could be Jesus, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther, Christ. They would still say the nominee is unfit for the bench and unworthy of a hearing at all. It's exactly what they argue when they say no president under investigation should be able to nominate a Supreme Court justice. But that's an argument only the fringes of the party will make, and it's one the rest of the party is right to be cautious about. If we take that argument to its logical extent, why should a president under investigation be able to conduct any of his constitutional duties? It's reasoning that argues that mere allegation should completely disable the office of the president without due process of law. And it's an argument that admits, at least implicitly, that there is no nominee that they would accept, which opens them up to political criticism for being unprincipled obstructionists. And so the Democrats have to refine their opposition argument a bit. They have to come up with some precise reasons about why this particular nominee ought to be opposed with such enthusiasm and absolutism. And the case they started making shortly after his nomination, the case they're doubling down with today, is that Brett Kavanaugh believes the president should be above the law. Dianne Feinstein tweeted Friday, "The president's Supreme Court nominee has said sitting presidents cannot be prosecuted, should not be investigated, and should have the authority to fire a special counsel at will. With the president facing serious legal jeopardy, the nomination should not be moving forward." Adam Schiff said much the same and more on Sunday, tweeting, "There's every reason to believe Brett Kavanaugh was chosen because he doesn't believe a president should be subject to investigation. We cannot accept a nominee to the Supreme Court who believes that any president is above the law, period. The Senate must reject this nomination!" That's a length Cory Booker went to earlier in the summer as well, to say that Trump picked Kavanaugh specifically for this reason, that Trump picked Kavanaugh with the expectation of exonerating himself.
He picked the one guy who has specifically written that a president, in fact, should not be the subject of a criminal investigation, which the president is right now. So this seems to be, of all the people, the most self-serving person he could choose in order to protect himself from this criminal investigation.
Now, if you're like me, you hear those grandiose claims and you think, I don't know, I bet there's more to this issue than they're talking about. And you're right. What they're talking about is actually an unclear or unsettled constitutional question. What is the appropriate way to deal with criminal allegations and proceedings against a sitting president? It's a question that has interested Brett Kavanaugh throughout his legal career, something he's written about, and something for which his Democratic opponents are conveniently incomplete in criticizing him. The origin of this controversy is this 2009 article Kavanaugh wrote for the Minnesota Law Review entitled "Separation of Powers during the 44th Presidency and Beyond." And it is true that within this piece, Kavanaugh recommends that sitting presidents be granted a temporary deferral of civil suits and criminal prosecutions and investigations. He wrote, "Having seen firsthand how complex and difficult that job is, I believe it is vital that the president be able to focus on his never-ending tasks with as few distractions as possible. The country wants the president to be one of us who bears the same responsibilities of citizenship that all share, but I believe that the president should be excused from some of the burdens of ordinary citizenship while serving in office." And if you just stop there and you read nothing more, you can see how that sounds kind of bad. Why should the president be excused from the burdens of ordinary citizenship? Why should he be legally special? Why shouldn't the law apply to him just like it does you and I? I thought it was equal justice under the law, not special treatment for some. Well, that's why you don't stop there. And you keep reading. And when you do, you'll see that this Democratic talking point against Kavanaugh isn't an honest one. It's not that Kavanaugh thinks the president should be above the law. Far from it, in fact. It's just that having only one of him makes the presidency a unique job, one that could be easily crippled with ongoing litigation in a way that Congress or the judiciary cannot be, since those branches have several members. So what ought to be the solution then? What ought to be the mechanism to hold the president accountable to the law? That would be the constitutionally prescribed mechanism. Kavanaugh wrote in that same piece, if the president president does something dastardly, the impeachment process is available. No single prosecutor, judge, or jury should be able to accomplish what the Constitution assigns to the Congress. Moreover, an impeached and removed president is still subject to criminal prosecution afterwards. So no, Kavanaugh never argued that the president should be above the law. Actually, he argued that the president should be totally subject to the law, in exactly the way the Constitution prescribes. But these Democratic critics won't tell you that part. The other part they won't tell you is that the Justice Department actually agrees with Kavanaugh. And no, not Trump's Justice Department either. In fact, this DOJ opinion dates back to the Nixon era of 1973. Here's a passage from an opinion under Janet Reno in 2000 reaffirming that 1973 opinion. Quote, "In 1973, the Justice Department concluded that the indictment or criminal prosecution of a sitting president would impermissibly undermine the capacity of the executive branch to perform its constitutionally assigned functions. We believe that the conclusion reached by the department in 1973 still represents the best interpretation of the Constitution. Moreover, the constitutionally specified impeachment process ensures that the immunity would not place the president above the law. A sitting president who engages in criminal behavior falling into the category of high crimes and misdemeanors is always subject to removal from office upon impeachment by the House and conviction by the Senate, and is thereafter subject to criminal prosecution." This isn't some grand conspiracy that Trump concocted. It's actually the prevailing historical wisdom of the U.S. Department of Justice. But it's not necessarily set in stone. These are simply Justice Department opinions. Any attorney general could presumably reverse them, since there isn't constitutional or statutory clarity on the issue. And that is why critics are saying Kavanaugh supports passing a law that would make the president immune from prosecution. Kavanaugh supports passing a law that would make the president king. Here's actress Alyssa Milano on her Twitter tirade this week.
Brett Kavanaugh is a strong supporter of the executive branch. He's even appeared to argue that Congress should bar the prosecution of a sitting president.
Yes, he has argued that Congress should pass a law, but that's to clarify the constitutional question that lingers. Is the president subject to normal prosecution, or is impeachment the constitutional mechanism to hold the president accountable? A law would clear that question up, and Kavanaugh supports Congress passing one. He wants statutory clarity and fidelity to the Constitution, not a throne of immunity for the president. My defense of Kavanaugh is not made out of any personal endorsement or personal desire to see him on the bench. Based on what I've read from him, which granted is far from his entire career of work, he probably wouldn't be my first pick. His opinions are often very technical, reluctant to take broad principled stances, opting instead to be very narrow and specific, much like his predecessor Kennedy did in the recent gay wedding cake case decided in June. Kavanaugh, in fact, is a former clerk for Justice Kennedy. What I care about is not Kavanaugh the guy. What I care about is the integrity of our assessment of him. It is entirely reasonable and defensible to disagree with Brett Kavanaugh on this presidential prosecution issue or any number of other issues, but it is not necessary to totally mischaracterize his perspective and arguments in the process. It's not only unfair to Kavanaugh and disrespectful to the American people, but if you perpetuate this sort of dishonesty, it only harms your own credibility in the end. Just by the numbers, it is a lock that the Senate will confirm Brett Kavanaugh and he will sit on the court next term. It's also highly unlikely that he's President Trump's last pick for the bench. So when the next one comes around, do you want people like me to greet your opposition as a legitimate concern, or do you want me to dismiss it automatically as the same type of exaggerated wolf crying you always do? If you want to be treated seriously, start by treating others seriously. That means taking their arguments at their highest, not misrepresenting them into unrecognizable boogeymen. That means being confident enough in your own argument that you can take your opposition at its strongest and still expect to come out on top. That means being faithful to the facts rather than partisan hackery. It'll be good to see during these hearings next week which senators are honest about this issue and which ones aren't. I know I'll be watching with my upcoming vote in mind. Keep an eye on it. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to come hang out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.